I assume because you are in the Active Directory talk, you know what we are talking about when we're talking about Active Directory. If not, this is a kind of short summary. We're talking about the directory service introduced in Windows 2000, almost 19 years ago. And the service is used for authentication and authorization of users and computers, typically in very large environments. That means we have a kind of database that contains a lot of information, users, groups, computers, objects, and very important corresponding attributes about these objects. And from a company or enterprise perspective, compromising an Active Directory, it's almost like getting the key to the crown jewels of your complete network. In the past, we were involved in some very, very large incidents where complete Active Directories were compromised, and have to be reinstalled almost completely. From an enterprise perspective, that's not fun. From a consulting perspective, it might look kind of interesting, but so for us, it's kind of win-win situation. But keep in mind, if this happens and your Active Directory gets compromised, the consequences are that an attacker can impersonate almost every user in your environment. The attacker can access servers, resources, and that means he can access data, mainly unencrypted data that's stored in the environment, but in a special use case, if you, for example, use Microsoft's data protection API for encrypting data, that also means that an attacker can get the key for this data and decrypt also these files. So that typically means that almost everything is possible. And I wasn't in the talks that happened all over the day because I had some other stuff to do at level 1. But I assume there were talks about Mimikatz, and of course, and you know what you can do with Mimikatz? That means that's always some kind of way to compromise your Active Directory if you don't have implemented the necessary countermeasures or mitigating controls. And of course, that's not a kind of very, very easy hack. I won't assume that's a kind of low-hanging fruit hack. There's a lot of things you have to do to accomplish, to get administrative privileges. For example, typically you need an initial attack vector, like an executed email attachment, or a link someone is following and downloading some malicious software. Maybe an exploited vulnerability, yet another vulnerability in Adobe Acrobat Reader, and so forth. The typical initial attack vectors that happen where clients get compromised and the attacker starts moving on, elevating his privileges, for example, get local admin rights, and then find a path to escalate his privileges to domain administrative privileges. And typically, what's also very, very often required are kind of misconfigurations and vulnerabilities that are present in your environment. So keep that in mind. It's not almost an easy way to take over a complete Active Directory, but you learned all over the day that it's possible with the right tools. And there are other tools available that can be used to do it in a kind of large scale. And that's the point where I hand over to JD, who will give us a short introduction into BloodHound, and what's possible with this. Shall I share my mic with you?
On two? No.
Okay, that's great.
So yeah, I'm gonna quickly brush over what BloodHound is. I know like Rohan and Andy gave their talk already, so I saw a lot of hands raising for, do you use BloodHound or did you already use it? Yes. Sorry, I'm already way far in my deck. Sneak peek. But I also saw some hands getting raised and people who never used it. So maybe like the info they delivered to you was a lot. This is also for me a way to kind of introduce my talk of tomorrow, where I'll be like going in the details of the tools that I built, the command line tool that I built for BloodHound, but it serves as a general recap over BloodHound and what you can do with it. hopefully you find it useful. If it's not enough for you, come to my talk tomorrow. There will be way more. But let's quickly get started. So I just made a plan, what, who, why, when, why, for, so that hopefully I answer all your questions with this. If not, again, catch us outside. So BloodHound what? An Active Directory attack path graphing tool. How did you say it, Captain Jesus? It was nicely said when you said there was not attack in there. You said an Active Directory. I'll look at the video. I saw, oh, he said it nicely, and then I forgot.
Yeah, that sounds great, yeah.
This is what it looks like. So if you haven't seen it, or anybody in the room has never used BloodHound? Okay, so you all know what it looks like. Well, you can make a really cool, funky shapes with it. I really love this one. This one is gorgeous. And actually, like, this is maybe projecting, but with the query that I ask here, funnily, what you find here is the enterprise admin, but the two ones that make the opposite pole here were the account operators. So in that case, you will see that actually they have the same rights. And if I look at it on the next slide, I find this one gorgeous, that you see that actually this group has the exact same rights over all the other groups than the enterprise admin. So it's also a way of visually seeing stuff without even having to read the data. I call this one the octopus. No, not the octopus, but the jellyfish. I like it. And if you repeat the query you see here, you will get that again in most environments. So I find it cool. So I just love this tool. I think like before that, I don't know how people were even representing their AD, because we're looking at like 10,000 nodes, and the human brain cannot imagine that. Now, my limit with BloodHound is once you saw this, being in the UI to work with it sometimes doesn't give me everything I want, so this is why via the REST API I build the tool. But that's for the end. Why? No talk about BloodHound. No talk about BloodHound without that one, so I guess you know it. If you didn't read the blog post, read it. It's from a few years back, but it still is so valid that I think it should be mandatory for an AD admin to read this. By who? They're sitting in front here, and we're missing Harmjoy. I like to face swap, so they're my favorite targets for face swap, of course. For who? For everybody, like I said. So red team, blue team, and I also think because like these guys, they deal with the Apex company, the tip of the iceberg, people who have a red team, a blue team, and the whole world is not like this. Sometimes you're the admin and you just flip your hat to be the security admin as well. So I say BloodHound is just for everybody. Run it. Don't be afraid of it. When? That's my thing. Do not run BloodHound in an environment that hasn't done his base job. Otherwise, you will just hurt yourself. And like he said, path reduction in that context is pointless. Take out one path and there's 20 left, and you take out those 20, there's one step longer, but there's still 100 paths. So before you get your tiering model, your separation of administrative roles and all that set, BloodHound is a bit just a way to scare yourself. So that's what you can get. So this is from a real environment, and I thought, oh wow. So I missed the eyes. I would just miss the eyes, but yeah, if you get this, basically
I would love to see a feature like the navigation system within BloodHound, like in 200 meters, turn left and get
this one is scary.
Yeah.
So BloodHound, how? Little quick, because if I come at customers, they often ask, okay, but what's it doing? The main components will be SharpHound, and that's your data collector. And the two questions you get is, does it need admin? No. Will it bring down my DC? No. So this is our regular user level LDAP queries or Win32 API calls. If you bring down your DC with BloodHound, your DC had a big problem before BloodHound. And BloodHound is not the cause. BloodHound showed you that you had a problem, but it's not you were almost ready to tip. So SharpHound will collect those data with LDAP and Win32 API calls. We ingest it into the Neo4j database. You've got a nice web UI like you saw. And then most importantly, Cypher. So I think if you start to use BloodHound, you will very shortly have to go into learning Cypher more or less, except if you use my tool, come tomorrow. Or my tool will help you learn Cypher, the other way around. And then what is Cypher? Just a quick primer on Cypher. I love it because it's like bricks of Legos. You can plug stuff into it and keep plugging, and your query starts to get like the one he showed. Takes time to get there. I've been struggling on the BloodHound Slack for a while, trying to understand. And if you work with BloodHound and you have questions, just drop on the BloodHound Slack, put a question, suddenly they pop up, and then a Kiwi appears and adds something in there. It's like a magic place to talk with. And then Sean Metcalf pops in and says, okay, cool. Happy to take part of the conversation. So that's the simplest query you can get in Cypher. Match X, return X will simply return all the nodes. And then you can start to complexify your query by giving a type to the node, and that would return all the users. And then this is the basic path query. So you start by matching a node. Well, there's several ways to play Lego, and there's several ways to do Cypher. But here I exploded it so you really see. I first get the X, which is a user with his name. I then get the group. And on the third match, I'm asking for the shortest path from the X to the Y. And I'm specifying here, without going too much in detail, but how many hops I allow. And I could specify what edges I want to see in this query. That would return here the shortest path from Bob to group 7. With any kind of relationship in between and in any amount of hops, basically. Just quickly, little UI tour, but I guess if you all used it, still, I like to show all the latest features because you didn't. And I really think there's like some really cool stuff in there. And not only to do it, but also to learn about the attacks. All the features he mentioned very quickly are actually some of my favorites. So here you have pre-made queries, and if I just run that query, immediately it pops here in the correct way, because for a while you were getting the placeholders for the variables, and that was driving me crazy. Now it's all sorted, so whatever you're gonna ask, you will see the query populate in the bottom. I find this a great way to just get the info and learn Cypher at the same time. The edge filtering is also really awesome. So that's something like, I was talking with a guy on the Slack and he said, oh yeah, I love BloodHound, and he was doing complex queries, right? And I say, how do I filter edges? And there's actually this tiny icon on top that maybe people don't see, but that pops up this bar, and you can start to say what you allow. This, whatever you take here would be filtered, stop me if I get it wrong, only in the shortest path query, right?
And most of the pre-built queries.
And the pre-build, but not the all shortest path. Yeah, exactly, I noticed that. Another really cool one, let me take whatever, but like he said, right-clicking on the edges, this is like a killer feature for me, because I don't remember stuff. I have goldfish memory, so I really refresh myself very often. I found, by the way, a few stuff that I think...
Well, you should PR them then.
I found them yesterday night while preparing my demo for tomorrow. So I'll PR them, but I'll face-to-face. Right there, you can there's so many cool options. You can change the layout of the graph, and this is how you get the skull sometimes. You can zoom in, zoom out, of course, so this you know, but mostly I really love the custom queries. So I added a bunch of stuff in my custom queries to kind of, I had this idea that I wanted to blacklist node, because like the way they do path reduction is by removing stuff from the database. I find this a bit aggressive, like, oh, and if I want to go back, I have to import the old database, and that was way too much for me. So I kind of thought, okay, can I blacklist node? And I'll explain all this tomorrow if you're interested, but you can do all this with simple Cypher query, and that's really cool info. Am I eating all your time, Michael?
I'm fine.
Don't get me started on BloodHound, otherwise I can go for ages. And then CipherDog, wow. So what is it? It's a PowerShell client for BloodHound. And yeah, like seeing it with your eyes, it's awesome. But then once you saw, like if your AD was a lady, you saw her, she looks good, then maybe at some point you want to close your eyes. And that's what you can do with this tool. So I even put a little IC art that's made to mimic. Have a look. That was actually, that took me way more time than you can think, because there's a bit of work that went in there. But so these are the command lists that I'll be demoing in the tool tomorrow, and everything you can do in the UI, you can do from the command line, which means you can also use the command line to filter. Let me just, can I?
Yeah.
Quickly go back to BloodHound. So here, like I asked all these users, I know I'm interested, I wanted to retrieve the users that have a path to that group, but what if I want only the ones that are, have, I don't know, set as sensitive, or I don't know what other property? How do you filter? I will have to go in each of them, have a look at the property, see which one I'm interested in. With the CipherDog, you can very simply use on the PowerShell side, do your where with the filtering. How many PowerShell fans in the room? Am I the only one? It's good, because usually, yeah, I know. Go long, and where is Dirkian? Python. We had the discussion yesterday, so I think we cover all the good scripting language, so we should be good. Very simply, retrieving a user would be like this. Have a look at this syntax. We're far away from Cypher. What user member of group schema admin at a degree star, select name and object, and you get the data instantly. So for me, that's really, when I discovered this, I said, okay, I love the UI, I love to see what I'm doing, now I want to close my eyes and just do it. So, was I here? Yeah. You can, there's like I put a list commandlet, I think just for John Lambert. It's an alias to another commandlet, but I thought list, that's funny because defenders should not think in list, but at some point we're gonna need the list to report to management. No matter what, you cannot put only pictures in your report, so you're gonna have to extract that list, crunch numbers out of it, and this is where this tool was born. And I kind of inspired by the work of Waldo, so I created the Waldo.io index, which is it's a simple way of trying to phrase this into words that like even somebody that's not from IT would understand. Here, so I do it for all the groups with a high value, and that's just a one-liner, not even like, that's really a tiny one-liner. And he starts crunching the numbers on all the for you, and I added the percentage of users, of course, but how many hops on that path, how many computers they touch on the way, because that's probably interesting for forensics, or because that's where you leave traces. And then the cost is only the ID that a member of Edge kind of traverse itself. So if you have 5 member of in a path that is longer than the shortest path with less member of, it's actually cheaper to take the longer way because it costs you nothing to get there. It's like a bit the cost in the routing, or I don't know. And then I added the last minute because this is probably a bit too many numbers for management. They really want something they can. So I added the average, and you can say high value group, Waldo.io, Waldo average. And here what I would want the message to take to management is that 50%, 54% of the users have access to 66% of the infrastructure. And then Michael said, okay, we found a way to assess environment. I'm still really searching for it. I'm searching for the threshold. Or is there one, actually? I don't know. I need to go measure in a lot of environment to start to understand what we're looking at and where is this a reasonable percentage. If that works, I'm not sure exactly, but this is what I'll be working on in the coming time. And this is mostly the tool I will present tomorrow. And that's my last slide, I believe. So yeah. If you want to know more about CipherDog, then please come to my talk tomorrow. That's all. That was my bit, and I hand over to... So just one thing, yeah. Because...
Don't leave.
No.
We are not done.
No, but because, yeah, there's 2 tools. I even would use Picasso. I would use my custom PowerShell, maybe to custom query schema attributes that are not in there. So you need this whole set in your toolbox to be able to get all the info. And what I think Directory Ranger does that BloodHound does not do is help you set up your base properly before running BloodHound. So I would, before running BloodHound, make sure you get your base straight. And this is what we do with our in-house tool that Michael will present. Yep. And please come to my talk tomorrow. Said that enough, I think. Oops.
Directory Ranger. JD already stated our basic approach about this is look for vulnerabilities and misconfigurations related to your Active Directory environment. In some short words, the Directory Ranger has 2 kind of options. One is a kind of audit perspective with a questionnaire, computer-based interview, yeah, asking you a question about your environment. And the second option you have is to run scans that looks for misconfiguration and vulnerabilities within your Active Directory environment. So the idea of the tool was to implement both and gives you an overview about your organizational issues, yeah, and also about your technical issues. Yeah. That was the main idea of the Directory Ranger. And the typical use cases we have within the Directory Ranger are self-assessments, self-audits, self-vulnerability assessments. Another use case that we have implemented and where the tool is helpful are merge and acquisition. And the third example are trust relationships, or deciding if you want to establish trust relationships, for example, in supply chains. Yeah, and let's have a look at these use cases. Very common in vulnerability assessments and audits is a task that you have to do self-assessment due to compliance requirements that you have. For example, if you're working in the PCI industry, yeah, or dealing with credit cards or hyper and so forth. Yeah, I already mentioned that we have this feature that looks for organizational issues with a computer interview, a questionnaire, that's how we call it, with a lot of interesting questions about your environment. The technical scan is done with standard user privileges. So we also integrated some behavior of our tool that reflects the requirements in big environments. Yeah? Because if you come as an auditor and the first question after hello is asking for administrative privileges to run your tool, very often the people are not very amused. Yeah? So that's why we try to do all the stuff with standard user privileges. And the second thing is we try to do that without installation of any agents. Because if you don't get administrative privileges, the second approach is install an agent that has local system privileges. Yeah? And that gives you much more information. So we also skipped that and focused on using the API that Microsoft provides, yeah, for collecting a lot of data. Yeah? And it's kind of amazing what kind of information you can get using the Microsoft API. PowerShell is working on top of that. Yeah? So everything you can do with PowerShell is using some kind of API calls in the background. Yeah? So I think you can imagine how powerful these APIs can be. Yeah? And after doing the audit and the technical scan, the tool analyzes the collected data for security issues that should be mitigated. Yeah? That's a typical use case for a self-assessment. In the merge and acquisition process, yeah, the typical task is that you have to do an assessment of a foreign Active Directory. Typically, you don't have any kind of communication relationships to this network. Yeah? So it's not easy to do this assessment with a tool in your environment. The typical question you want to answer is how secure is the other Active Directory before you maybe in the first place establish a trust relationship, and later on maybe you integrate this network and this Active Directory into your own environment. Yeah? And typically before you want to do that, you want to define tasks, yeah, and mitigations that the other side has to implement before establishing the trust, because it doesn't help you if your Active Directory is kind of unhackable, yeah, and the other Active Directory is a kind of low-hanging fruit. Yeah? So then it's also game over for your Active Directory. So that's a typical use case you have in the merge and acquisition process. Yeah? And very often, especially if your company is producing stuff like cars or whatever, yeah, you want to establish communication between your own Active Directory and your suppliers. Yeah? So that's another use case that happens quite often. The trust relationships are established within your supply chain. Yeah? And that typically means that you have to do an assessment of the network of your partner, yeah? And answer the question, again, how secure is the other Active Directory, yeah? Before making the decision if you want to establish the trust. Yeah? And also, again, define tasks and requirements, yeah, to get this network more secure. assuming that it's not as secure as yours. Yeah, and that's also very interesting functionality we've built into the directory ranger. I have prepared a short video that I will show in a second. Yeah, especially these two use cases, merger and acquisition and trust relationships in supply chains. Yeah. You don't have any possibility to assess the network. What you have to do is typically send someone that does an audit or an assessment, yeah, of this network, get the report, analyze the report, yeah, and then make your decision. We have a kind of mobile application, not for smartphones. Yeah, it's mobile in terms of you can give it to another administrator. That's built into our tool that can be configured, exported, sent to the other administrator. He runs the tool, collects the data, and sends all the collected data back, and then the data can be analyzed in your central tool, and you get a kind of information how many vulnerabilities are present in this environment. Yeah, and this video, yeah, it's not that long, but the video demonstrates the whole process of configuring we call that run instead of scan, this run, running the tool, getting the data back, yeah, and getting a report. Yeah, almost in 4 minutes, and I cheated only a little bit at some place, yeah, where I had to wait for my web server because it was kind of unresponsive. Yeah, so I cut that off from the video, but that's the only place where I was cheating. So let's have a look. That's the directory ranger. Yeah, and typically you create a new run. The interesting part is the external run, where this mobile application is created. Yeah, then you have to choose the forest you want to access. Yeah, and the run policy that contains, for example, the technical checks. Yeah, and then you create the run. Yeah, and that's almost everything you have to do to be prepared. Next step is, as I already mentioned, that you have to export that. Yeah, export happens here. Yeah, and when you push the export button, yeah, then you have to enter a password. The password protects an encryption key, yeah, for encrypting the data, the configuration data for this mobile application. Yeah, and that gives you the possibility to send this file over an unsecured network, Dropbox, email, whatever. You have the option to change the credentials that are used to connect to the network. Just for the case that you received wrong credentials, then the administrator in the other network is capable of changing that when he runs the tool. And after that, tool is exported, downloaded, and ready to distribute. Yeah? And as I said, Dropbox, whatever. Tool is moved to the system that should be analyzed. That's a zip file that will be extracted, and within the zip file you find the binary that does the analysis, and the configuration that's run config. The configuration file has to be chosen. That's run config in this example. I'm not that fast with a mouse pointer, yeah, so I lose some time. Yeah, no possibility for cheating. And here we enter the configuration password. That's the one I entered when generating the run. Yeah, you can produce a log file. The log file is not secured. So that's why this alert window arises, just to inform you, okay, if you send the log file via an unsecured communication, maybe sensitive data will be exposed. And then you start the tool. Here you have the option to change password username if you did that wrong, and the tool starts scanning. Yeah, and that happens quite fast, even in very large environments. Yeah. With, let's say, more than 100,000 objects, yeah, the typical runtime of the tool is about 30 to 45 minutes. Yeah, so it's nothing like waiting for days or weeks or something. Yeah. Then a zip file is generated with the results. And the zip file, yeah, that's the part you have to send back to the directory ranger itself. And last step is import the zip file, yeah, also again via the web interface. Yeah, look for it. Somewhere is my directory ranger zip file. Typically starts with D. There it is. Open it. Yeah, file is imported. Yeah, and now the directory ranger starts analyzing all the data. Yeah, and producing the report. Yeah, data is already collected, and that goes quite fast. Yeah, 1, 2, 3. I didn't remember the number of seconds that is used. I only remember that the whole video is about 4 minutes. Yeah, so acts quite fast. And here's a report. Everything is done, and then you can switch over to the report and look at the results. Yeah. Here's a kind of traffic light approach, what kind of problems were identified with Directory Ranger. Yeah? And that's a short overview how this tool is working. This merge and acquisition feature I just mentioned, yeah, is one of the features that's heavily used by the users that already have installed the Directory Ranger. And they really do large-scale assessment, yeah, like accessing 60 to 70 forests that are under control of these customers, yeah, all over the world. Yeah? So it already proved that it can be used in large-scale assessments. Okay, that was a short introduction of the Directory Ranger. If you are interested in more details, please visit me, not in a talk next day. Yeah, you can meet me at level 1, yeah, there where the coffee and the cake is. Yeah, that's the place where I am. If you have additional questions. Yeah, if you are interested in more information regarding Active Directory security, we have a Twitter handle, yeah, called Directory Ranger, where we tweet about Active Directory security. There's a lot of stuff. It's not just related to our product. It's about Active Directory security. So if something new is happening in the community, typically we are tweeting about that. So start following it. I think it's a very useful source of information. So I think we are almost in time. Yes, 6 p.m. Yeah, perfect. Are there questions? If not, thank you for attending our talk, especially so late. And I hope to see you all in some minutes at the dinner. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael and JD. Thank you.